He says, "This is my way, where is yours? Thus I answered those who asked me the way." For the way, that does not exist. Here we see exactly the rejection of universal good, evil, and ways that fits a subjectivist interpretation. Zarathustra reinforces this message in part 4 of Zarathustra, the Last Supper, where he suggests that the higher men, so part 4 is this story where Zarathustra lives up in this cave on the mountains. He goes down and meets all these higher men. Some of them are just wacky characters. Like there's the retired pope who retired because God was dead and he had nothing left to do. So yeah, and Zarathustra brings all these like wacky characters, these two kings who have a donkey, the retired pope, this like evil magician, and all these other people up to his cave, and they have dinner. So there's this one guy who's kind of supposed to be sort of a Jesus-like figure called the voluntary beggar. He objects to the rich meal that is being served. Zarathustra wants to eat lamb spiced with sage, and everyone's like, yeah, let's get some of that. The voluntary beggar says, look, I don't eat that kind of food. I eat just like beggar food. And Zarathustra says, be of good cheer as I am. Stick to your custom, my excellent friend. Crush your grains, drink your water, praise your fare as long as it makes you gay. And then he connects this to a broader point and says, I am a law only for my kind. I am no law for all. And then he starts describing the kinds of people like him to whom his pronouncements are addressed. And here Zarathustra is likening the values he promotes to the values of taste. They're fit for some and not others, depending on what they like. These discussions of value fit subjectivism really well, and they don't fit non-cognitivism quite as well. So non-cognitivists, again, people who think that moral judgments aren't beliefs, both subjectivists and non-cognitivists reject objective moral values. But one thing about non-cognitivism is, as a non-cognitivist, you're not required to address your evaluative claims only to others like you. You can address them to everybody. You're sort of saying, hooray for this, and you can say hooray for this to everybody, you know, regardless of how they feel about that thing. And this is actually a virtue of non-cognitivism as an account of moral discourse. It isn't sort of like restricted to the people like you in the way subjectivism is. When you're trying to talk about something you like and tell someone else it's valuable for them too. It doesn't have that restriction. If Zarathustra's comments here are any indication, the value he's interested in lacks universality, the applicability of one standard of value to everyone, as well as objectivity, truth independent of everybody's mental states. So this lack of universality, that one standard of value doesn't apply to everybody, that's hardwired into subjectivism, but it isn't hardwired into non-cognitivism. And On the Spirit of Gravity and The Last Supper seem to ask for a metaethical treatment that is sort of hardwired not to be universal in just this way. Now, there is a way to build this into non-cognitivism if you really want to. You could sort of build a rather complicated non-cognitivist or even sort of reductive, objective, realist theory. It gets really tricky exactly how that's working. But you could build theories like this, but they would be overly complicated, and there's nothing in the texts that really drives us to build the complicated version of these things, where you have room for things being another way, but they're not that way. Subjectivism just does all of this in one shot. You have a non-objective, non-universal kind of value, and a very simple story about how it works. It's grounded in people's passions, and different things are valuable for people if they have different passions. Now, one advantage that the non-cognitivists and the realists in moral theory have is that they can account for a kind of moral disagreement that subjectivists can't account for. So non-cognitivism allows two people who have different passions to disagree about morality by having opposed passions or emotions towards the same thing. So one person says, expressing their passion in favor of it, hooray for that. The other person expressing their dislike of it says, boo for that. Non-cognitivists like to say, that's disagreement. You know, hooray versus boo is people disagree in a certain way, even if it's not belief. Objective realist views allow disagreement perfectly well. I think that's wrong. You think it's okay. Disagreement. In belief, one of us believes wrongness is there, the other doesn't. On a subjectivist view, however, once we specify the passions of the agent for whom something might or might not be valuable, there's no more room for meaningful disagreement. If they have a passion for the thing, and the thing really is that way that they have a passion for it, it's valuable for them. There's no saying, they're wrong about this, now. No, it's valuable for them. Agents can be wrong if they're mistaken about their own passions, but that's it. Now, Zarathustra actually addresses this issue. And this is a section on those who are sublime. He says, "And you tell me, friends, that there is no disputing of taste and tasting, but all of life is a dispute over taste and tasting. Taste, that is at the same time weight and scales and wear, and woe unto all the living that would live without disputes over weight and scales and wares." Zarathustra here is accepting the role of our tastes themselves in constituting value. It's the weight and the scales and the wear. And he shrugs at the fact that his view doesn't allow this meaningful disagreement, this disputing over taste and tasting that people are pushing him to accommodate. What he points to instead is the real conflict between individuals of opposed passions that plays out in all of life. If this is right, we shouldn't interpret his kind of value as permitting disagreements of the kinds that contemporary metaethical theories rightly regard themselves as required to give an account of, because this just isn't something he cares about. So let me develop the subjectivist view a bit more and get into what's probably my favorite section of Thus Spoke Zarathustra. It's called On Enjoying and Suffering the Passions. And here Zarathustra describes how one's passions can turn into virtues after one rejects negative moral evaluations of them and allows oneself to embrace the values they present. Here's what he says. "Once you suffered passions and called them evil, but now you have only your virtues left. They grew out of your passions. You commended your highest goal to the heart of these passions. Then they became your virtues, and passions you enjoyed. And whether you came from the tribe of the choleric, or of the voluptuous, or of the fanatic, or of the vengeful, in the end all your passions became virtues, and all your devils angels. Once you had wild dogs in your sight, but in the end they turned into birds and lovely singers." One of the interesting features of a subjectivism grounded in passion is that it allows a close connection between value and virtue. Passions, on the subjectivist view, are the foundations of value, in the sense that having a passion for something is what makes it valuable. All passions, then, end up being passions for valuable things. It's the passion that makes it valuable, and so the passion ends up being a passion for something valuable, sort of automatically. If we take a virtue to just be a passion for something valuable, I think this is a pretty straightforward way of thinking about virtue. If there's something good out there, wanting to make it happen or do it or whatever, that's virtuous, if it really is good. And if there's something bad out there, wanting it not to happen, that's a virtuous desire of yours. So suppose we're subjectivists, we think passions make their objects valuable, then automatically every passion becomes a virtue. Because now every passion is a passion for something valuable. And I think that's what's going on in this section. Interestingly, if you've read a lot of Nietzsche, if you've read On the Genealogy of Morals, you'll know that in that book, Nietzsche is really negative on revenge and on the vengefulness of the slaves who he sees as creating Christian morality. But one interesting thing about this section right here is, here Zarathustra allows the passions of even the vengeful to become virtues. And this fits the subjectivist reading really well. As I've spelled out here, on this ordinary understanding of virtue, you'll get every passion, even those that Nietzsche himself is usually not a big fan of, those become virtues too. So I think that's a pretty amazing sort of, bit of text right there, in the light of larger things Nietzsche says. What would be the most virtuous kind of action on this account? Well, it would be action driven by incredibly intense passions. Because then you would have a really strong desire for something really good. And that's a virtuous thing. Zarathustra describes, this is further on in the section, how someone whose passion has become a virtue in this way should speak and stammer, that's his words, in praise of his virtue. He says, "This is my good, this I love, it pleases me wholly, thus alone do I want the good. I do not want it as divine law, I do not want it as human statute and need. It shall not be a signpost for me to over-earths and paradises. It is an earthly virtue that I love. There is little prudence in it, and least of all, the reason of all men. But this bird built its nest within me. Therefore, I love and caress it. Now it dwells with me, sitting on its golden eggs. Thus you shall stammer and praise your virtue." This passage tells us a lot of things about the kind of value that interests Nietzsche.